From Jerusalem, Israel, this is From the Midwest to the Middle East, the podcast that explores everything new in U.S. and Israeli economy. Here's your host, Philip Stein.
Very, very, very excited to have a special guest today, a famous Yerushalmit, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. Normally, I would go into a long introduction, and there is a long introduction for you, Fleur, but I think I'm going to start by just referring to as a famous Jerusalem personality who I would refer to as a Renaissance woman in terms of all that you
That's
have
so
done.
kind. That's so kind of you.
And I think my first question will already lead to some of the things that you have done and do. So it seems to me that you've had the most interesting career path, namely attorney, politician, spokesperson, and diplomat. As someone personally myself has been working with Startup Nation since its earliest days, I go back to .com era. I would like you to share with your instances your current most recent role as a special envoy for innovation on behalf of the foreign ministry.
So thank you so much, Philip. Wonderful being on your podcast. So that's really interesting because what as you mentioned, I've had an eclectic career. And I like that. I like the fact that every 5 years, somehow I get ants in my pants and I want to step out of my comfort zone is a big part of my ethos. I think everybody should try and step out of their comfort zones as much as they can.
Agree.
And that's how you grow. So what happened was that after 8 years in City Hall, as a city council member and then deputy mayor, I decided that I didn't want to continue my career as a local politician. I felt that I'd done as much as I can do in terms of Jerusalem and economic development and the image. We have a great mayor. And I really felt that I wanted to do something a little bit more global. I'm the co-founder of the UAE-Israel Business Council, so I have a lot of very deep connections in the Gulf. And so I went to, at the time, Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, and I said, this was, of course, before October 7th, and I said, you know, Israel is about to open up relations with Saudi Arabia. I would love to have some type of role that accelerates that or develops like what we did in the UAE and with Bahrain and Morocco, that accelerates the people-to-people piece, which is really the differentiator between how we are doing the Abraham Accords and how we had peace with Egypt and Jordan. Peace with Egypt and Jordan kept very much on a strategic, military, top level and never really trickled down to people. And that's really one of the reasons why there's so much hate and resentment from Jordan and Egypt that still have openly anti-Semitic curriculum and communications. All their media is extremely anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. So
actually, just to interrupt, and I myself, in the 80s, I made 11 trips to Cairo thinking that
there you
I
go.
could take advantage, but you're right, there was no trickle down.
There was nobody to speak to.
Right.
I mean, I'm not blaming anyone. That's just how it was. Well, right. I am blaming the Egyptian government who continued with their anti-Israel rhetoric because it was a useful way to blame Israel for everything. But essentially, the Abraham Accords were different. And my co-founder, Doran Barak, and I recognized this even before the Abraham Accords were announced. We set up our council. And so I felt in the summer of 2023, when I was having conversations with the foreign minister, that some type of role in opening up this warm peace with Saudi would be great. I also felt that there's a lot to be done with Africa, really a lot to be done with Africa. Mm-hmm. And in general, I didn't want to limit myself to a particular geographic region. So after, thinking about it with him and his staff, I said, why don't you make me a special envoy for trade and innovation? Special envoy because it's kind of a diplomatic role without leaving the country. I didn't want to leave the country. I don't want to leave the country. I've got 2 kids in the army. It's complicated. So I don't want to leave Israel, especially not at this point. So he said, sure, take it. So I was officially announced in September. It was the Jewish holidays. And after the Jewish holidays, I was like, yeah, I'm going to and there was going to be a local election, which means my tenure as deputy mayor would have ended end of October. And I would have assumed this role right after the Jewish holidays, which would have been the 8th of October, right? And then the 7th of October happened and everything changed. Everything changed. Right. Now, how did I wind up going from, outgoing deputy, and for 6 more months, I remained deputy mayor because the local election was
right?
delayed for 6 months. All of a sudden, I'm still deputy mayor. Jerusalem has become the city of refuge for 50,000 evacuees from the north and the south. There's lots of work to do. There's lots of work to do also in explaining to the world what's going on. And that's really what I fell into, this role of explaining what was going on, because on October 7th, even though I'm like you, I'm Shabbat observant, once I realized that we were at war, and I switched on my phone,
Right.
The next thing I know is that the BBC is calling me because nobody else is answering. So the IDF spokes isn't answering. The Prime Minister still till today doesn't really have a foreign spokesperson in his office. It's a disaster. And so people were calling me because I was the person who was always speaking in behalf of Jerusalem. I was the person every time that there was a problem on Temple Mount, on Ramadan, I was in front of the cameras. I was in front of the cameras when we had issues in Sheikh Jarrah. And so I captured that spokesperson niche as Jerusalem. And the day of October 7th, when nobody was answering, the press started calling me. And since then, I do at least 1 to 3 press interviews a day about what's going on. It's very curious how the country essentially the people of the country led the country for 2 weeks when the government and the army was paralyzed almost. But it's been the same with communications. It's been good people that have been leading the communication charge for Israel, because there's absolutely nothing coming from the top, which is a real shame.
So, were you able?
I didn't answer your question.
No, you gave a fascinating answer, but was that something? Yes, innovation obviously was not the main topic
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. However, I think we're in a different place now than we were 15 months ago, especially now with President Trump announcing that the opening of Saudi is going to be a real thing. And so I believe that my role now is going to become, as the role I was given, is going to become much more relevant again when it comes to the people-to-people peace in the new era, or Abraham Accords 2.0 era. And I'm very excited about that, because it's always wonderful to be involved in something positive. And one of the reasons that I'm excited about it is because 10 years ago, you may know, you were in the Jerusalem in the first round of the .com, but then Jerusalem went to sleep in terms of innovation and the tech ecosystem until 10 years ago, when me, with a bunch of other incredible people, we essentially pioneered the first accelerator in the city of Jerusalem. We went to the local government at the time and said, listen, Jerusalem, there's no reason why we have to give up the startup nation to Tel Aviv. And at the time, they said, no, it's not going to happen here. And I kept saying, well, Hebrew University is still the best university in the country. Bezalel Art and Design School is the best art and design school in the country. Why is it that we can't create an ecosystem here? And honestly, that's why I'm a big believer of bottom up, because I was one of the people who pioneered for the new innovation ecosystem in Jerusalem. And we built it. And then the government came. And so I've always been interested in the economic development, because I truly believe in peace through economic development. I believe in building bridges through economic development and giving people opportunity. And so I'm very pleased that I'm in this position now.
Wow, that's a lot. And Jerusalem, as you know, needs it, and Israel needs it. And I think it's a wonderful cause. Let me now go to one of the hats you wear. Okay. When I was preparing for our podcast, I noticed that you were elected as the first female Secretary General of the World Federation of Zionists, an organization that
General Zionists
was once known as the General Zionists.
Yes.
And it turns out, in my research preparing, it turns out that in December 1946, at a meeting of the General Zionists in Basel, Switzerland, my wife's late grandfather was elected the treasurer of this Zionist entity.
Amazing.
It's fascinating to look through the meeting minutes, which I looked at some of them, and really you can read how the state was being built.
Exactly.
And particularly that the General Zionists were very heavily involved in those pre-state days. Now that we have a state, almost 77 years later, what is the mission of those? You're the heirs of those General Zionists.
Well, quite right, Philip. The General Zionists were always the pragmatists. They're the people who were the finance ministers and the people really involved in the day-to-day and the pragmatic way of thinking about building a country, developing the economy of the country. So it's very suitable to the way I like to look. There are some, it's very interesting because there are two types of politicians. There's the ones that are very involved in the politics, and there are some just doers, and I think that we've lost sight of the doers. I met with a friend of mine in Knesset this week who's an MK. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was saying, Fleur, we're just involved with surviving here. Who's actually getting the work done? And so the general Zionists were the people getting the work done in the early days of before the state and after the state was created. So it's quite right. And it's amazing that you have, your wife has that yichus. But essentially, why is it relevant today is a great question. And I'll tell you why. Because we still have a World Zionist Congress. The one that Herzl started in 1997 still exists. Now, what is it good for today? Unfortunately, over the last few decades, it's lost its relevance and it's lost its influence. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be that way, especially because they decide the leadership of the most profitable non-profit in the country, which is Kakal, Keren Kayemet Lisrael, which owns 12% of the land of the State of Israel. And the leadership of that organization, as well as the leadership of the Jewish Agency and Keren HaYesod and the World Zionist Organization, these people, but mainly Kakal, have billions and billions of dollars, Philip. And how are they spending it? Are they actually influencing anything for the good? Are they influencing diaspora-Israel relations for the good? Are they doing anything pragmatic or visionary for the health of the state of Israel and our image abroad or our engagement abroad? The answer, unfortunately, they do some good things. I like what they do in terms of the green image of Israel with the water, and that's all very nice. But they give away $1 billion a year, Philip, and we don't know where the money is going. And I certainly know where we need to put the money. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that I became the Secretary General of the Kol Israel, my good friend who's the chairman, David Borowicz-Yari, invited me to...
Who has also been on this podcast.
Oh, wonderful. So he invited me to be in leadership with him because we're both doers and because we both understand that maybe some people see it as Mickey Mouse Jewish politics, but it actually is a very, very influential platform that has more money than the majority of ministries in this country. Wow. And so what we could do with that money, with bold, new, visionary Zionist ideas, this is why I'm into it. Really, it's not because I miss politics. It's because I want to, because I know that we need fresh ideas and visionary leadership. And unfortunately, the national institutions, which is what Kakal and the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish Agency are called, the national institutions have grown stale. And so we need a new vision. And that's why I'm involved.
Most people view them as anachronistic, organizations that don't really, but you're saying they have tremendous resources.
Well, they have enormous potential and resources, and all they've become is grazing grounds for retired politicians, grazing grounds for people who want a nice job and not do too much, or want a nice, position. Right. And where is the action? And then everybody, it's a very political entity as well. So it's Jews fighting internally with a lot of resources that could be put to the things that the Jewish people really need. And this is about the Jewish people. This is not just about Israel.
Right.
And that's why I'm so excited about the potential.
No, I think referring back to my wife's grandfather, he never moved here, but he contributed to a lot of things and built there several schools and that he was a doer and they were doers. That was a generation of doers. So
and also, Philip, what people, I think October 7th has changed everything in such a dramatic way that I think many Jews around the world are looking for ways to engage and to influence. How do we get a say on what's going on with Israel? Well, we've been fighting, we've been raising money, we've been speaking out, we've been advocating, we've been, getting a lot of slack for it, like the students. Where's our point of influence? And I think that's very important.
Agreed. Again, you had mentioned earlier about your taking early advantage of the Abraham Accords, and particularly this UAE-Israel Business Council, which, in light of all that's happened, as you said, everything has changed since October 7th. I think Air Dubai and Fly Dubai, they never stopped.
They never
They never stopped,
They never
despite
stopped.
all the American airlines and the Europeans, they never stopped. Can you just share what the council does and how its functioning has been impacted by October 7th?
So the UAE-Israel Business Council was created in July 2020, a month or month and a half before the Abraham Accords were announced, because my co-founder Doran Barak and I understood that something was cooking. We didn't know what, and we wanted to give a framework to the Israeli companies that were already there. And so what we did in the beginning of all of this was essentially to create a platform where Emirati business people and Israeli business people could communicate. We did webinars with hundreds of people. We did events with hundreds of people. Justine Zwirling, a good friend of mine, and I also co-founded the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, because we really believe that if we're going to have a warm peace, and women should be very much involved, we just bond quicker, we talk more. And so we did a lot of events for women. The women in the Gulf really are always very willing to take the lead,
Wow.
and their government really pushes women's leadership, which is very inspiring. And so essentially we were leading the people-to-people peace between the Gulf countries that made peace and Israel. We became the foremost people-to-people organization doing that. Now, of course, October 7th, everything's gone a little bit on ice, but let me tell you, business continues, because this year, we ended up the year with 3.4, I think, billion dollars of trade between the UAE and Israel. And if it weren't because of the war, we could have ended up with 3.1, 3.2. The year before, 2023, was 2.8. So business as usual. Now, we're not going to be seeing demonstrations with Israeli flags there, of course not. But the fact that business as usual, the fact that the trend is for trade and innovation to continue with those countries, and the fact that on April 2024, when Iran was attacking us, the UAE not only helped us, but 2 days later admitted they were helping us, that to me shows that the Abraham Accords are not going anywhere. They have stood the harshest test in the world, and now hopefully are going to be going through a new era of growth.
And what you pointed out before, qualitatively much better than the Oslo Accords in terms of.
Oh my God! Well, the Oslo Accords, were set the framework for the Palestinians to have self-sufficiency, self-determination and autonomy. And in the end, they just proved to the world that they're a bunch of gangsters who can't even run their own territories. And if anybody doesn't see it that way, then they're really blinding themselves.
I agree. All right. So my next question, again, I'm going back in terms of your career path, and as you point out, every 5 years you make some change. So I really like that. But as I said at the beginning of the podcast, you're a very well-known Jerusalem personality, and you were up until recently a deputy mayor. And at times, again, as you mentioned, you were really functioning as the foreign minister of Jerusalem. I was fortunate to have arrived in Jerusalem in 1979.
Wow.
Initially landing with my wife in the Jewish quarter, but my wife actually preceded me with her family, coming for a family sabbatical in the summer of 1969. They were living in Rehavia. And I started to look, I'm an accountant, I like numbers, and Jerusalem, like no other city in Israel, grew in terms of population between 1970, just about when she spent the summer here, till 2020, which is just a few years back. The population grew by 3.5 times. In fact, there's no city in Europe or the Americas. You have to sort of go to Shenzhen, China, to find cities that grew bigger than this in terms of population in that period of time. It's just amazing when you look at the statistics.
And the Arab population has grown exponentially there. We really suck at genocide and apartheid, it turns out, because they've gone from 60,000 to 300 and odd thousand.
Okay, so there's a 5 factor. And still you drive around the city and there's growth every neighborhood seems to be
everywhere.
doing something. So
Yeah.
so you as a real insider, how do you account for this growth in light of all of the challenges that Jerusalem faces both internally and externally? I know it's a big question, but it's
Well, there's a number of reasons. We all have a lot of kids here. That's the main reason.
okay.
So the Arabs have kids, the Haredim, who are almost 30% of the city now, have a lot of kids, as you know. But the average Israeli, including the secular Israeli, people in this country, we are the leading OECD country on birth rates by a lot, not by a little, by a lot. So even without the Haredim, we have like a 3 point something birth rate in this country. Now, Jerusalem has got the two biggest minorities in the country are the Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox and the Haredim. And they live in their largest numbers. We are also the largest Arab city in the country, and we're also the largest Haredi city in the country, much bigger than Bnei Brak or anywhere else, which means that essentially 40 plus 30%, 2/3 of the city are ultra-Orthodox or Arab. They have a lot of children, and the rest of us also have a lot of children. So it's not surprising. Also, remember, Jerusalem has grown over the last, since 67. We united the city, and we've brought new neighborhoods. And let's not forget, we're the capital city of the state of Israel. Jerusalem's brand, in fact, is a stronger brand than Israel. When you want to talk about country branding, Jerusalem's brand is absolutely incredible. A lot of people want to live here. We're the heart of the action.
Yes, but that I think that the unsung maybe here is that the infrastructure, maybe at times it feels like it's lagged, but it has kept up, okay? And that's quite an accomplishment.
I agree. It's kept up, and people don't give, I think, city government enough credit in this country as opposed to America. We only have two layers of government.
And as
one
you
is
mentioned,
city, one is national. We have a great mayor. We are also the most advanced transport city in the country because we are the largest city in the country by double. And so, yes, we've kept up. And this mayor is all about building, and improving infrastructures and improving public spaces and parks. And I think the city is looking better than ever.
Yes, I recently read about the plan. Apparently, it's for real that the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem Railroad will eventually extend to the Tachana Rishona, the original Jerusalem train station, which
past the historical sites. You know, it's very exciting. We will 10, 20 years, we will have about 8 light rail lines all over the city. And people talk about, Israel. People don't understand how, in fact, sustainable this country is and everything that we've done. That and you know this better than anyone, if you're going to go from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, and it's just much easier to do it by light rail and train, people are not going to leave their cars at home for ideology. People will only do it if it's easier, like Manhattan, like London. And that's where we're going to go.
The year before we made Aliyah, 1978, we had friends who had come back from a year here, and they said to my wife, "Do you know you can go to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and come back the same day?" Which was
Of course, it used to take days to get here.
All right, let me jump back before we get to the end of this to October 7th. This particular Tisha B'Av, I heard a speech. My wife and I heard a speech by Romy Gonen's mother regarding her daughter, who in one of the Batei Knesset, one of the synagogues in Baca. She's a very articulate speaker, and she had mentioned that to that date, she had given over 1,500 interviews just to the Hebrew press. And I understand that between English and Spanish interviews, you've been, as you said to me earlier, even now, 2 to 3 a day. So you have a lot of exposure to the foreign press, particularly since October 7th. Do you find the foreign press hostile and unsympathetic to what Israel has been going through?
Depends who. We have the friendly foreign press. So you've got outlets like Fox and Newsmax from the American perspective. Some of the Christian channels are very sympathetic. Sky News Australia is very good. In England, you've got channels like Talk TV and GB News. So you do have the kind of emergent conservative media, which is getting more prominence because everybody's realized that everybody else is lying to you, essentially. And then you have the mainstream media. The mainstream media's a starting point is that Israel is an evil occupier. That's their starting point, which means that everything you do is they're looking at you for that perspective. So for the first 2 weeks, Philip, all I did was explain to people, remind people, educate people that we'd left Gaza in 2005. Because the more you say occupation, 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 it sticks. And that's why, in fact, the Palestinians or their Qatari enablers are geniuses in marketing, because it's very simple. And we have not even begun to address the communications war in that arena. But yes, I've given hundreds of interviews. I don't count, but hundreds of interviews. And I still do. And I feel like this is my calling. This was my miluim. This was my reserve duty. And I used to stay in the first 3 weeks of the war. I was doing 10 interviews a day. I would do interviews through the night. I remember, sleeping in my daughter's room, who was in the army, so that I wouldn't disturb everybody else, because I would be getting up at 2 and 3 in the morning for doing American interviews, because I thought, my God, if these soldiers are in the front line fighting and risking their lives, the least I could do is do interviews so that Israel's communication is understood. And so, yes, I mean, a lot of them have been hostile. Some of them I do when I want to take a shower afterwards, like Piers Morgan. But I think to myself, if I'm not there, then who's doing it?
Yeah, actually, this morning I often sometimes just like to see what the other side is saying, and I watched something called PBS NewsHour, which is, but they actually this morning had a very positive, sympathetic piece on Kfar Aza. They went in, and I was expecting, and it was very, very positive, and what happened there. So maybe there's hope.
Maybe there's hope.
Okay,
Maybe
so
they're waking up.
We're going to wrap up, not looking back, but looking forward. So what are your plans for the coming year, and what advice might you have for my many listeners who could be helping Israel, during these challenging times, where to sort of put their chips or put their energies?
Okay, so I'm going to make two short pictures. One is the World Zionist Congress elections in America are from March to May. And if people want pragmatic leadership for the Jewish world, then I would urge them to vote for Kol Israel, which is the slate, the party, which I'm the Secretary General of. We have an incredible list in America of doers, of those students who fought anti-Semitism on campus, of very influential leaders. And we really urge people who always ask me, Fleur, I can't vote for you. And I'm like, yes, you can. Now you can. You can vote for my party, which will make a difference, because we don't sit around, we get things done. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I'm doing, Philip, which might interest you, is I have co-founded an organization called Campus Israel, which is going to be the organization to advocate and facilitate for diaspora Jewish kids, or anyone else who wants to come, to study full degrees in English in Israel. We are the startup nation. We have the best unicorns per capita, grants, Nobel Prizes, other prizes. And I just see it as a very natural thing for somebody from the a kid from the Jewish community. There's 50,000 American kids going into college every year. I'm saying, save your parents a lot of money. Don't suffer anti-Semitism. Have the time of your life and get to know the startup nation and all the opportunities it can offer you. If you want to stay or if you want to leave, either way, study in Israel. And that's what I'm going to be dedicated.
Yeah, it's interesting. My wife, but even when we came here at Hebrew U, there used to be a junior.
Yes, that doesn't exist anymore. But Philip, I'm bringing it back.
Yeah,
I'm bringing the junior.
And I think a lot of people
yes,
who were on that program made Aliyah.
A lot of people did, but I'm not doing this for Aliyah. I'm doing this for the incredible experience of spending a year to 3 in Israel. So my new organization is called Campus Israel. I'm now I've already raised some money. I'm going to raise more money, and this is going to change the conversation of college.
Fantastic. If people want to follow you, where's the?
Well, most people tell me we can't miss you. We see you every day, so I'm exhausting people now. So a number of places. Please follow me on my social media platforms, Fleur Hassan N, 2 N's, and I also have my own podcast. It's called The Quad. It's on JNS. It's the intelligent version of The View, with the Jewish women and sometimes women from the Middle East. And so I urge everyone, if they want to follow me, to watch my podcast or follow me on socials.
Thank you for so much taking from your busy schedule to spend a little time with me. I really enjoyed it, and I wish you much success. And hopefully next time I visit my daughter in Jerusalem, we'll bump into each other.
Well, you can also call.
Thank
you, Philip.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Feel free to visit us at www.pstein.com or look for Philip Stein & Associates on Facebook and LinkedIn.